Quiet, numbskulls. I'm broadcasting.
Hello, you're listening to the podcast. So there I was. It's how all great aviation tales begin. This is episode 98. I lived. Now I got to do it again.
Oh, that was a great story.
That was a great story. Holy smokes. Opens with a bit of a tease on there.
Yeah.
Wandering around the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, because you can.
Not, very unique experience. What a great guest, Hoover.
Yeah, right.
Air Force F-15 pilot that ended up doing an exchange tour with the Marines, and that's how he got carrier Qual'd. Let's just leave it at that.
Absolutely. Let's bang out a couple admin items here, Fig. We got a new 5-star rating this week that I'd like to tell everybody about because, we're trainable. So when we get these 5 stars, we thrive on that stuff. Outstanding. This podcast is outstanding. It has great stories from outstanding military men and women. You will definitely laugh a lot and learn a lot. Check it out. Semper Fi, Scotty Southard, a.k.a. Pre-Flight. Indeed. Yeah. One of the listeners we picked up from the Mac Geek Gab. You'd think I'd learn to be able to say that after having co-hosted that show.
Mac Geek Gab.
There you go.
Thanks, Pre-Flight.
Indeed.
Also, we have a new section lead.
Yeah.
Sean Moody Blues. Thank you, Sean. Call sign Moody. Thank you so much.
Well,
very humbling.
Let's go with call sign Blues.
Sean Moody, call sign Blues.
Yeah. Moody Blues.
Hey, you know what? I'm trainable. It's been a long day, bro. It's been a long day.
Right on.
Sean Moody Blues. Yeah, call sign Blues.
It has been a long day. It's after 10 o'clock on the East Coast. After having flown in from Europe and been up all day, we wound up in late, and this has just been a long day. But it was a great show. Opened up with a tease about being out on an aircraft carrier. And, of course, everybody who's on an aircraft carrier deck has been there before and has been trained to be there. Not the case when your background is Strike Eagle.
No, it's a very hazardous environment. So just getting to the airplane, getting to your airplane on the deck of an operating aircraft carrier is, well, it's hazardous for crying out loud.
It is hazardous to your health. It's a good way to die. But some really great stories. Almost a show title was I did get kicked out of flight training.
Yeah, terrifying story. Yeah.
He was kicked out of flight training. Listen, you'll hear it.
Yeah. So. And, his story about how he got his call sign, which, he downplayed before we started.
It's not real funny.
I felt like I did 1,000 crunches after he told that story out loud.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
It was awesome. The other thing that we need to tell you, Pilot Debrief on YouTube. That's his channel, Pilot Debrief. He did some safety work in the Air Force, and that led him to an interest, and people would ask him about it. So he created a channel, much like Blanco Lirio or Scott Perdue. He does post-mishap analysis, and he has several shorts up there as well, 60 seconds or less, that are a little more lighthearted, but great content. Go check it out. And the reason I mention that is twofold. One, because I want you to go look at his stuff, but two, he was another great broadcaster. He puts us to shame.
Yeah, he did. A great interview.
Yeah.
Great stories, well-spoken. He had 2,200 plus hours in tactical jets, retired out of the Air Force, did the exchange tour with the Marines. Very unique opportunity for him. And boy, he had a great perspective about it.
Did indeed. He did indeed. And we found out which child was his favorite.
Yeah, no surprise there. What do you say we get out of the way and let this thing rip?
Let's do it. Here comes Hoover.
Don't sit on the ejection seat handle, by the way.
Don't do it, especially not when you're going to get shot off the nose of a carrier.
This here is a true story about crossing the pond at night in the world's smallest cockpit on the tanker through the weather. Oh, and to the tanker crew who did that, thanks a lot. We really appreciated that. I'm just kidding. no matter. Well, there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond.
So there I was, an Air Force guy, finding myself walking out on the carrier deck and being told, go find your aircraft and go take off. I'm thinking to myself, what the hell have I gotten myself into?
Well, that is a great. So there I was, opener. Welcome, everyone. This is Fig coming to you from, well, hell, I'm in Denver, Colorado today. Where's my co-host?
Greetings, everyone. Repeat here, coming to you live from Indianapolis. So, and that is the voice you heard of. Some of you may recognize his voice from his channel, which is Pilot Debrief on YouTube. Callsign Hoover, one of the few Air Force Eagle drivers to carrier qualify and fly Hornets with the Marine Corps. Welcome, Hoover. We're thrilled that you could join us tonight. And up front, thank you for being so flexible with our screwed up schedules.
Yes, thanks, Hoover.
I'm glad to be a part of this.
Okay, I want to go. I want to get the rest of that, but we'll get to that because I knew your background, but that's pretty awesome.
We always have to start at the beginning. How'd you get started flying? What was it that piqued your interest in airplanes, and how'd you get there from here?
Well, so when I was a kid, I always wanted to be an astronaut. And then I found out you have to do more advanced math to figure out how to do that stuff.
There's the rub right there.
So,
hey.
Eventually made my way off to the Air Force Academy. And that's where, I got about through freshman year of trying to do calculus and said, all right, that's enough. And I tapped out of that and said, well, I guess we'll just stick with the regular flying instead of pursuing that engineering degree and doing everything else that you need to become a test pilot and go down that path. So, but yeah, I mean, back when I was a kid, I used to always just draw pictures of the shuttle and, always had that sort of interest, but no one in my family ever served in the military. And we lived in Tampa, and we'd go down to the air shows at MacDill Air Force Base there and see, the aircraft down there. And so that kind of got me started on that path.
And not far from the launches. Did you ever go to a launch?
No, but you could see them from where we were, across the state there. And I still remember being, I think it was either third or fourth grade, going outside and then watching the Challenger break apart.
Shit.
So that's something I'll never forget, and like as elementary school kids, like you're kind of like, you don't really understand what's happening until, years later, the gravity of the situation. But yeah, that's something I'll never forget, seeing that happen live.
Right. That's one of those moments in American history where people know exactly where they were. So
where were you, repeat?
I was driving through the back gate at Cherry Point. I was a firing platoon commander in the Hawk Missile Battery, and I was on my way back from a morning break. I think I'd been out PTing or something. For some reason, I was at the house, and I was on my way back to the battalion and heard it on the radio as I was driving through the gate. So it was horrendous. How about you?
I was walking through the student union in college, my senior year, and I saw it happen live on the big screen there. And I was like, oh, shit, that's not good.
Terrible.
Right.
One of the reasons I asked you about had you ever gone to a launch? I did have the privilege of going to a launch many years later. A friend of mine, another one, was on Columbia, and we went down to that launch. 3 miles away, the deep resonance of the thumping that was going through my chest as that thing was lifting off the pad and going into outer space was one of the most impressive demonstrations of man-made power I've ever seen in my life heretofore. So anyway, well, happy times. What a great subject to start off.
So I obviously I heard you say Air Force Academy, Hoover.
Yeah. And
then their pilot training, and obviously you went the fighter route.
Yeah. After the academy, I ended up doing a year on casual status, waiting to go to pilot training.
Oh, shit.
I was over in Ramstein, where I flew with the C9 squadron, which was probably one of the greatest assignments that I ever had. Young second lieutenant with no responsibility, and here you're gonna, you don't need to be qualified on the aircraft. We just need you to go along with us, and you can work the oven and cook the meals.
Did you bounce around Europe in the C9?
Yeah. So we went all over the place. So they do all the air medical evacuation stuff. So during the time I was there, the biggest thing they responded to was the USS Cole bombing.
Oh yeah.
So, obviously I didn't go on that mission because being a non, working crew member or whatever, but
Right.
They have a pretty big mission set over there with standard routes, to Sigonella and Aviano and over to Incirlik and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it was a good
That would have
exposure.
been fall of 2001, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a good exposure, coming out of the Air Force Academy to what a flying squadron was like at least on the non-fighter side. And then off I went to pilot training. And then, like you said, I initially, to be honest, I wanted to fly helicopters because I just thought that was kind of cool. But I think I was also probabdon't being heavily influenced by the fact
Sticks
that
giving the high sign in the background there. Right?
Sticks is in the background doing push-ups and I don't know. He's going crazy. That's awesome.
So we had two of my T-37 instructors were MH-53 guys that did all, the spec ops stuff. And so they had all these cool stories that they would tell us like, man, this sounds really awesome. I should maybe go do that. Cause that sounded a lot funner than, flying around in a C9.
Well,
and eventually, about halfway through the T-37 training, I had some friends that were over flying the T-38s on the fighter track and they were like, no, man, this is way cooler. Come do this. And so that's the direction I went. And then got very fortunate enough to, pick up a Strike Eagle slot. And then that's how I got started.
Awesome.
Nice. What a beast that airplane is too. Yeah. Huh? The Strike Eagle. Fig, do you remember the first time you saw an Eagle?
Yeah, I do.
Up close?
Well, you mean air to air? Or you mean like...
walking around. The first time I ever saw one on the ramp was, I was actually at Fatima at the air show out on...
dude, yes. I was there with you.
Yeah.
We were there together.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Walked up and I'm like, oh my God, that's a monster airplane. I had no idea how big the Eagle was.
It was like a F-14 size.
Striking.
I mean,
yeah.
It was like as big as a tennis court practically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's cool. But you didn't have any fun flying that, did you?
No, probably not.
No. That was a blast. That first assignment was, everybody remembers their first assignment,
Sure.
The friendships that you make and you kind of going through that whole process, becoming part of a fighter squadron and deployments and things like that. And so,
right.
So yeah, it was.
Where's the training for that?
Seymour Johnson, North Carolina.
Okay.
And then did you stay there or where were you based in your first?
So I started there, and then the second assignment was the Hornet exchange assignment that I did. And then I ended up, after that, I went back to the Strike Eagle before they finally decided that was enough flight time for me and I needed to go to school and learn how to be an officer or something like that. And so I did that for a little bit.
Sticks in the mud.
So in your first tour, how long did you get to fly in your first squadron?
I left that first assignment with just over 1,000 hours in the Strike Eagle.
Three years time or
over that 3 year period. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Damn.
You're getting that's good flying.
Yeah, it was a lot of we did 2 combat deployments during that time. And so there was a lot of close air support, and we were flying out of Qatar up into Iraq, and so those were, usually like 6-8 hour missions, so you build up the hours pretty quick.
I'm trying to think. I don't think there were F-15Es there when I was there in 2015. When were you there? What years? What years was your first deployment?
First deployment was in 2004.
Okay.
And then the second one was in the spring of 2006.
Wow, that's pretty quick turnaround time for you guys.
Yeah. But back then we weren't, so the Air Force, they eventually went to the whole 6-month deployment thing. But back then we were only doing, the 90 to 120 day.
Oh, wow. Even active duty guys were doing that?
Deployment time, yeah. Yeah, wow. So that's
a good deal.
So it wasn't bad.
No,
that's outstanding. That's outstanding.
Go ahead, brother.
I was just going to ask, so how much time did you wind up total in the Eagle, in the Hornet? When it was all said and done?
My total flight time over the military is just, I think, a little over 2,000 hours, like 2,300, something like that.
Yeah.
I ended up having, I didn't get a lot of time in the Hornet, which you might not be surprised, but, maintenance is not as the same kind of standard that they do in the Air Force, and the funding isn't the best. But then, it was after that third flying assignment, going to school and then doing a staff job. And then, then I ended up doing a remote over to Korea. So I ended up out of the cockpit for about 5 years.
Oh, geez.
During my 20-year timeline. So, yeah, it was painful.
Watching airplanes fly going, I know how to
that's
do that.
rough. Okay, so I want to back up just a second, Hoover.
Yeah.
When you were in flight school, T-37s and T-38s, and then the what do you guys call the blue T-38s? Or maybe that's changed. So once you got,
yeah. So
let me get straight to the point.
Yeah.
Was there any excitement in flight training that sticks in your mind? Like, oh shit, I remember this one time. So there was this one time. So there I was. I mean, do you have any of those in flight training?
I do. They're not. I would say flying related.
That's okay.
But I'll
I'll
share one story because I did get kicked out of pilot training for about a period of about 12 to 18 hours.
Okay, so this is worth a stog. Okay, now
so there may be
intrigued.
a show title there. I did get kicked out of flight training.
Yeah. So when I was doing the T-38 thing, I was the class leader because I was the highest ranking guy in the class at the time. And so we had a trip that we were supposed to go on up to the centrifuge to do that stuff, and then come back, and it was over the weekend. And so we drove up there as a class. I think we had like a government van or something. But anyways, we kind of, I won't talk about what happened while we were on that trip.
Damn it!
But I will say that when we came back, we had some stuff with us that we acquired along the way from some various places that we frequented while we were there.
Ah,
and
there you go.
As we're pulling back into the parking lot, as we're getting close to the base, I got this phone call. And it was from the flight commander, and hey, how'd the trip go? You guys heard you're coming back, this afternoon. I said, yeah, we'll be back a couple hours. So, okay, great, because the squadron commander would like to see you in his office as soon as you get back. Don't bother going to your dorm room. Just come straight in and report into his office. This is like a Sunday afternoon. And I'm like,
okay, that's not
thinking
good.
like, well, what did the guys in the other van do that I don't know about?
Yeah.
That I'm about to find out when I walk into the boss's office.
He's not hanging in his office on a Sunday night afternoon for grins.
No.
Yeah, well, and I kind of asked that question. It was like, is there anything I should be concerned? Oh, no, he just wants to chat.
Sure he does.
Of course, it's not really what that meeting's going to be about. So, I'll never forget. Just kind of we pulled into the parking lot, and I told my buddies, I was like, all right, I got to walk into the office. You guys take whatever's in these vans. I don't want to know about it. Get it out of here. Go on your way. And I'm going to have plausible deniability over this whole thing.
These aren't the drugs you're looking at.
And because that's what I thought it was about. Maybe the guys did something, on the trip that I wasn't aware of. And I walk into that office there, and he's got the lights off. And he's sitting there in the dark behind his desk, and there's like the glow of the computer screen on his face, and kind of half like, should I report in or should I just what should I do? And walk in there, and he doesn't want me to sit down. He's like, stand right here, It's like, and then he starts off this, like, I just want to let you know how utterly disgusted I am right now. And he says, as of this moment, you are no longer in pilot training. And I need you to go back to your dorm room. You're going to find a letter from the OSI, which is the Office of Special Investigations, for those that don't know. So you're going to find a letter from the OSI. They've confiscated some things from your room, including your computer. And, there'll be instructions in that letter for what you're supposed to do, and we'll go from there. But we're done talking, and you can go ahead and leave now.
See, so he did just want to chat, and you listen.
Yes.
This sounds more treacherous than just some small antics.
Yeah. So I'm thinking like, well, what in the world is going on? So I called my buddy at the dorm who lived across the hall from me. I'm like, hey man, did anybody come by my room this weekend? She's like, no, what are you talking about? I'm like, okay. So I make my way over there and I open my door and everything's in place. My computer's there. There's no letter. And I'm like dumbfounded. I'm like, I don't know what to do now. You know,
are you getting punked? Are you thinking there's got to be a mistake at this point, right?
Yeah. So I called my flight commander, who was the one that originally called me, told me about the meeting. And I said, hey, boss, you know, like I went and I met with the boss, and he told me I was kicked out and there's stuff in my room and stuff missing, but I came back to my room. There's nothing here. There's no letter. I don't know what's going on. You know, what am I supposed to do? And then I get hold on, I'll be right over. I'm like, oh, crap, you know. And so now he's coming over. He gets there. He kind of walks up to my room, looks around. He's like, all right, I'll be back. And then he takes off.
Okay.
And doesn't explain to me what's going on. So I'm just kind of left standing there.
So is he a major, lieutenant colonel?
He's a captain. The squadron commander was a lieutenant colonel, so no 5.
Okay.
And to make a long story short, you know, a few minutes later, you know, he shows back up in the parking lot. He's like, all right, I talked to the squadron commander. Here, you need to talk to him. And he like puts me on the phone with him. And squadron commander is like, he says, I forget his exact words, but it was something like, what's your first name? You know,
there's more than one of you.
Up to this point, to this point, and I'm not going to say, but up to this point, I was just lieutenant, you know, so-and-so,
right.
You know?
Yeah.
And, you know,
John Doe, you're Lieutenant Doe.
It turns out there's a lot of Joneses or Smiths or, you know, whatever.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
And so I tell him my first name. And he's, all right, I'll call you back. A few minutes more goes by. He calls back. All right, disregard everything I said. You know, you're going to show up tomorrow and we'll figure out the paperwork, you know, and we're going to go from there. And that was the end of it. And it was still Sunday afternoon, you know, so I guess they had already done up some paperwork, because the next day when I came in, like I had to sign some forms and do some stuff. And then it was probably about later that afternoon where the wing commander, so the guy in charge of the base, the 06, wanted to meet with me and apologize on behalf of everybody. As it turns out, there was another lieutenant who had the same last name as me, who had been involved in
some fairly nefarious things.
Yeah,
apparently.
let's just say just extremely inappropriate type of activities that would have been on his computer.
Oh boy. Okay.
You know, and so that was, I mean, it was one of the scariest moments I had in pilot training that didn't have to do with flying.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
Well, that's totally understandable.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was kicked out. And then the funny thing was that wing commander, he ended up being the wing commander at Seymour Johnson while I was there. And so I got to run into him again. And I remember I had a few too many drinks at the O Club when I did. And I said, hey, you remember me? I was that guy you got kicked out.
You kicked me out for 18 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, that's a story with a happy ending, and I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah. And who needs laxatives when you get a chat like that from
Well, you know, and I share that story 'cause,
God.
like, I feel like, you know, my entire flying career, I was just extremely fortunate that I never found myself in any type of, you know, situation where I felt, you know, really unsafe or had some sort of complex emergency. That the closest thing I had to a complex emergency was we had an AMAD fire. You know, it's a airframe mounted accessory drive, you know, that connects the generator and the engine, or whatever, and then the strike eagle. So we had one of those fires, but it happened after like a 7-hour mission over in Iraq, and we had landed and we had, you know, taxied back in, and we were about to shut down in the trucks when the thing lit off.
Oh,
you know, and so the timing of it just happened to work out. Like it was the best timing possible for something to catch on fire. You know, I mean, it was actually a pretty good sized fire. But
well, that's a good place to have it in the chalks. You know, after you get
I mean,
back.
other than that, you know, you talk to all these guys that, you know, live through, you know, some pretty crazy stuff or had really weird things happen to them, and like I said, I think I was just very fortunate. So a lot of my flying stories aren't necessarily flying stories. They were just kind of crazy stuff that happened over the years.
Yeah, that was, you know, most of my stories that I tell are not really flying related. They're in off-duty hours. Let's just put it that way.
There's that,
as long as only 10% is true, you're good. You know?
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And
Big
as
dogs, that's right.
yeah, and as Gallo put it, there's plenty of good war stories ruined by an eyewitness. So
That's right. That's right.
So, wow. And so it lit off in Iraq. That reminds me, a friend of mine who was a Massachusetts Guard, a National Guard, did a pump over in Iraq. And he said, talking about being there in the summer. And he goes, well, you ever walk through jet exhaust? I go, yeah. He goes, well, in Iraq, it actually cools you down. So,
Yeah.
so I see the fire lighting off, kind of be expected. But
All right, Hoover, you have a call sign Hoover. How'd that come about? And is it vacuum related?
It is not vacuum related.
Okay.
And the other question I get is if it's, well, there's two other questions. I'm either somehow related to Bob Hoover,
right.
Or it has something to do with Animal House.
Right.
And so it's none of those.
Well, damn it.
Surprisingly.
Well, there's no eyewitnesses here, man. Make it sexy.
The story, as the story goes, at Seymour, I did, the initial training, the Strike Eagle, and they have 4 squadrons there. You got 2 training units and then 2 operational squadrons. And since I was stationed there, you just kind of walk across the street to your operational squadron, bring all your flight gear with you. And so at some point when I dropped off my flight gear, it got mixed up with somebody else's, right? So when I went into to the life support shop to do that initial fit check on everything, went to put on my G suit. It had been maybe like a month, because they kind of give you some time off after training. I went in and like the G suit was just, probably about 5 sizes way too big. And, so the tech, he's sitting there trying to like cinch it down. And he's like, sir, this is like, I can't, this thing's way too big. We're going to have to get a smaller size. And then, and then this starts into the joke of like, cause like I'm a pretty skinny guy. And back then I was a little bit skinnier,
Shit.
And so he's like,
what happened to you, dude? Right?
What's that?
Was he like, dude, did you get a tapeworm in the last month? What happened to you?
Well, so that starts in his joke of, like, well, sir, like, I don't know if they make a male G suit this small. We're going to have to get a female G suit, And so
that's not good.
And so and then this turns it, which there's no such thing. It's just all, G suit, whatever. And then, but there was a female in the squadron who happened to be in there at the time, and she had overheard all this.
Oh boy.
And so she, as clever and as funny as most fighter pilots are, decided that she would go around the squadron saying like, hey, that new guy that just showed up, did you hear he wears female flight suits because he likes the way they're form fitting, so he's actually a cross dresser. So this went on for a while because like back, this was like 20 years ago. So people didn't really talk about that stuff,
Yeah.
And so people, so I get these weird looks sometimes from people in the squadron because like you could tell they were thinking it, but they didn't want to say anything or ask me about it, And then eventually, like people started asking me. They were like, "Who's going to ask him?" And then somebody would ask me, like, "Hey, man, like I heard you wear female flight suits. Like, what's the deal with that? Like, does the zipper go all the way around, or like how does that work? And so I'm like, where are you guys hearing this? Like, no, like I don't wear chick flight suits. Like,
Yeah, what the hell?
And so that went on for a little while, and then of course we ended up. They wanted to wait until we did the naming until we were on a deployment. And so we go on the deployment. And unfortunately, some things happened on that deployment that made it turn out to be a dry deployment where they took away all the booze from us. So the naming wasn't as creative as it could have been. But we had this story about, here's this guy, he was potentially a cross-dresser. And so somebody said, well, hey, J. Edgar Hoover was a cross-dresser, and nobody knew about that.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So that's where Hoover came from.
That's, well, you know what? I guess it could have been a lot worse. That's a great story. Thank you.
That is actually really good. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I was there for a second, and I got about 100 crunches worth of laughing in right there, so I appreciate that.
Well, the thing about fighter pilots, as you guys know, is as long as you tell something with a certain air of credibility, you know.
Oh yeah.
And as long as you make it people believe you. They're like, yeah, like that makes sense. You know, so and she was really good about convincing people.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's with the zipper? Does it go all the way around or what? What's the deal? That's rich. Oh man, that's awesome. Okay. So no drama, no air drama, nothing, no good combat stories from your first couple pumps over there or anything memorable?
Oh yeah. So the first deployment we were over there it was actually a second deployment, but most of the time we were over there, it ended up being, kind of slow because, OIF, it would kind of come and go in waves depending on what the guys on the ground were doing. And, if your timing was off as a squadron, there just wasn't a lot going on. But one of the times we were over there, I was a flight lead. And so we were taking the formation up. We were supposed to do our standard, what they called recce or what's it called? Route convoy support, scanning the route in front of the convoy, right?
Sure.
In the middle of the night. And you're not working with somebody in the convoy. You're working with somebody back in the TOC, who's talking on HF or something else with somebody else on the convoy. So third party relay type stuff.
Yeah. How could that not get screwed up, right?
Well, the thing is these type of missions, really what it was is, they wanted us on call in case, troops in contact or something kicked off. And so they'd assign us to cover these convoys just to give us something to do because there wasn't anything else for us to do. There weren't enough missions going on. And, it's one of these things. Okay, well, we want you to scan out in front of the convoy. We want you to, tell us if you see any bad guys out there, type of thing, Yeah. And you never find anybody. But sure enough, flying along 2:00 in the morning or whatever, my Wizzo is like, I got something, and all of a sudden the excitement kicks off and he found a guy on the side of the road. It was around the bend from where the convoy was headed. And you could tell that, with the MVGs, you can kind of see some of the convoy lights and stuff. But as soon as the convoy kind of came around the corner, that guy, we watched him in the targeting pod. He dropped everything that he was doing. He was digging something on the side of the road and he dropped it. He not only did he run across the street, but he jumped in a ditch. We had like a little stream and he swam across that. And then he got into the field and then he started running again. And we're like, okay. Like that's
not normal. No,
2:00 in the morning, so we had to wait for the process of, relaying to try to get the convoy to stop. So we're screaming at the guy on the radio, trying to get him to yell at the convoy to stop, eventually get the convoy to stop. And then now this starts this long process of, okay, well, now we got to verify what it is, while at the same time keeping track of this guy as he's going through the field so we can satisfy rules of engagement, making sure we have 100% positive ID of him from the time we found him all the way up until that point. And as we're doing that, we're waiting for somebody from the convoy now to walk out in front to see what it was. And sure enough, he had been planting an IED, trying to ambush those guys. And so, of course, in the middle of all that, I'm having to coordinate, for a refueling asset to come in, to give us some more gas. And of course there's weather, so we're dealing with that too and trying to figure that out. But it worked out. And eventually, to much to my surprise, they eventually gave us authorization to strike. Because at that point, like the ROE in the theater was starting to change. It was becoming more conservative. Yes. Where like, okay, well, if you're not actually being shot at, then we're not going to let you shoot back at somebody. Oh, but they did. They let us, and so we were able to take care of the threat. That was no longer a threat at the time, but definitely would have been a threat in the future.
This sounds like a process that was not expedient. Could you just guess at the timeline from the initial contact with this, you saw this person until he actually went kinetic?
It was long enough where I sent my wingman off to the tanker because I knew we were going to have to do what we call yo-yo ops, which for those that don't know, you got
your own.
You're over there as a 2-ship. So you send one jet to the tanker. So that way, when he comes back, you can go. So that way you're always leaving one jet on station to provide the coverage. So it was long enough for me to coordinate for a tanker. And then for me to send my wingman to the tanker, for him to refuel and then come back. And then as he was coming back, we were getting set up for our strike. And then we were able to hang out a little bit longer. And then I left him on station for me to go to the tanker. So it was a while.
Holy cow. It's the wheels of administration. That's frustrating.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow. And so as average sortie in combat for you guys, how long was that? From well, just for our purposes here, from the time you briefed until you got back and debriefed, what kind of day are we talking?
Most of the sorties over in Iraq were about 7 hours, I would say. I had a couple that were like 9 to 10 hours, just depending on what's going on. And then, but
that'll flatten your backside. Damn.
the briefing and the debriefing for those are definitely, they're much different than the brief and debrief that we do stateside for training missions, because because they are, so your overall day though was probably about 10 to 12 hours though. I mean, but it's not terrible, but if you're doing that, 4 times a week, like it can get, it can get tiring.
Yeah. Where were you based when you were over there?
I was an LUD at Qatar for both of those deployments. I never did the Afghanistan thing. So some guys did that. That was a little bit different flying over there, but.
All right. So did you volunteer for an exchange tour, or did somebody come to you and say, you need to do this? How did that come about?
I volunteered. I wanted to do it.
Nice.
So when I was on my second deployment in the Strike Eagle, we had a female Wizzo in our squadron whose husband was a F-18D Wizzo with the Marine Corps.
Okay.
And he was stationed up in, where were they stationed up at? They were stationed somewhere up in Iraq, operating out of there while we were stationed down at IUD. And when the assignment cycle came out, here's the list of potential assignments. I think there was like an F-22 exchange, or not exchange, an F-22 transition, and then some other stuff. And then there was this thing, it said F-18D exchange program, Marine Corps. I'm like, man, this sounds really cool. Like it's doing the same mission I already really enjoy doing, providing the support to the guys on the ground and doing that stuff. And I knew that the Marines were doing a lot more of it than what we were doing. And they tended to be operating under not a different set of rules, but I would say more flexible set of rules than the Air Force guys were,
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
I mean, talking to her and her husband, and kind of, getting a feel for that, I was kind of like, yeah, I definitely want to do this. And I knew I could, they were also doing the FAC-A mission. So the forward air controller stuff. Yeah, and so I wanted to do that. I thought that would be really cool. That's something the Strike Eagle doesn't do. And so I put it down as my first choice, and it worked out.
Okay. So you went to where for F-18 training?
So I went straight from Seymour out to Miramar to do the RAG.
VMFAT 101.
Yeah, 101.
Yeah.
Sharpshooters out there. So I did that for a year. And initially I didn't think I was going to do the carrier call stuff, because I knew I was going to a D model squadron, which the Marine Corps D model squadrons, they don't go to the boat, when they deploy. So I didn't know that was going to happen, but it was kind of cool to find out that, hey, we're going to go ahead and put you through this anyways. So I spent a year out there, and we can talk more about that in a second. But then after that, I went over to Beaufort, South Carolina for VMFA 533 with the Hawks for a two-year assignment with them.
And so was your experience at VMFAT 101 your first experience being around Navy Marines?
Naval radiators.
Yeah. What I'm digging at is, what was your, because you alluded to it a little bit. What was your, how can I say
the different impressions of what it was like to fly Air Force versus Navy. There's actually 2 of you sitting here tonight that have done both. Fig finished up doing Air Guard.
Air Guard.
So yeah. So
I mean, I understand. I started in the Marines, and then when I transitioned to Air Force rules, I was, having been brought up one way, I was constantly frustrated at the at the operating restrictions that were put on us in training. And I found it ironic that when we deployed to combat, everything was waived. Whereas, the way we were brought up, there was no restrictions. And when you went to combat, that's how you operated every day. It was a little different, philosophical, I guess. So how did you feel about that? Or, what was your impression? Did you think, holy shit, these guys are a bunch of freaking cowboys? Or was it like, okay, I can
it was interesting because, the Air Force is, everything from pilot training all the way, through your initial training in a fighter squadron, it's just very regimented. You've got your set hours, you've got, this is going to happen, this,
right.
and this is the schedule. Like, there's no really deviating from that schedule, and then you show up there, for training with the Hornet, and it's like, it's like typical naval training, where you're kind of like, oh, well, here's what you're supposed to do. It's up to you to go do it, and figure this out, and no, we don't have any class on this because you're supposed to go study on your own type thing, And then just the way they manage the schedule to everything else, it is completely just so different from how the Air Force manages stuff. And I mean, I remember at one point I'd gone, I think about 3 weeks without flying, and, but I didn't know who to talk to or whatever. And like, I'm like, all right, like, this is enough. Like, and I walked, you're not supposed to walk into the scheduling shop as a student, but I had a little bit more leeway being, like, not really a true student since I'd already had operational experience. So I walk in there, I'm like, hey, what's going on, man? Like, I haven't flown, in a couple of weeks, it's been almost 3 weeks. And they're like, well, we don't see your puck on the board. Well, somebody had knocked my stupid pucks off the board and they were on the floor behind the dang refrigerator there.
Puck on the board. Yeah, what he's talking about is a magnetic thing with probably your name on it, right?
Yep.
And so unlike the way we operate, you in the Air Force, you knew what you were going to do 3 weeks in advance, right? Yeah. I mean, they schedule a month in advance. Yeah, well, that's not the way we do it, as you know. I mean, we're doing good to figure out the next day. You know?
1600 comes out tomorrow's schedule.
Yeah, it's a whole different. Oh, and so let me ask you this. When you were in 533, VMFA, AW 533, did you have a side billet other than squadron pilot? What was it?
So I started off as the assistant OPSO, so the assistant operations officer, and then I went on to become the double AMO, or the assistant aircraft maintenance officer.
Yeah,
which a lot of the Marines were not happy about me getting that job.
Well, it's kind of a coveted, coveted job. Well, so that's different from Air Force Fighter Squadron, right?
Yep.
I mean,
so Air Force.
You guys did almost no maintenance in the squadron, right? Is that the?
Yeah, maintenance is not in the squadron. They're not integrated. They're complete separate chain of command, separate groups and all that stuff. And so you don't really interact with them other than when you go down to sign to get the jet, and then for your little bit of maintenance debrief once you're done, here's what's wrong with it. And guys would go down there and you interact. And it's really weird too, because like when you deploy in the Air Force, like all of a sudden they all become one unit underneath the squadron commander for the flying squadron. But when you're back at home station, they're separate. So that was probably the best experience that I had out of that exchange program. Was just it taught me a whole lot more about leadership,
right?
And getting to work with the maintainers and everything that they do. Stuff that. If I tried to do that in the Air Force, I would get looked at really weird.
Right. Because that's not normal.
It's just not normal to see somebody down there. Like if you ever saw like an Air Force officer out there doing a FOD walk, it's like, what the heck's going on?
Right.
But yeah, so that was a really good part of that assignment and those jobs that I had.
I got a lot more questions, but I think we need to
real quick.
Pause.
Fig,
Let's pause.
FOD is foreign object damage. So we're looking for a screw, anything that may be on the ground that could get sucked up by a jet engine, and
there you go.
Cause a few $1 million worth of damage. So we had to walk around and look for that stuff. FOD walk.
Yeah.
So,
Is this a good time to take a quick break? Repeat?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's take a couple and a half minutes and point our listeners to some people who are going to offer them a good deal and in turn are offering us a great deal. So we'll be back in 2.5. Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts and prepare for takeoff. Today's in-flight service includes a special feature. And no, I'm not talking about extra legroom. Better, amazing food. That's right, I'm talking about Flying High with Factor, the meal service that delivers delicious, chef-crafted, and dietitian-approved meals right to your hangar. I mean your home. You know, last week my son and I were grounded at home with our stomachs in autopilot mode, no energy to go out, and definitely no fuel left in the tank for cooking. Sounds like the perfect storm, right? But Factor was there to save us from declaring minimum fuel. We taxied right over to the fridge and picked out a gourmet meal for each of us. I had the chicken with an artichoke and spinach sauce. It took my taste buds to new altitudes. And my co-pilot, my son, devoured a pork chop with a cheese and barbecue sauce that was simply out of this world. That's what I call first-class dining. And with Factor, you don't need to be a flight engineer to prepare your meals. It's all about 2-minute meals. Fuel up fast with restaurant-quality dishes that are ready to heat and eat from the refrigerator to the plate and ready to eat in under 3 minutes. And for those with early morning flights, Factor's got your back with pancakes, smoothies, and more. It's a whole menu designed to keep you fueled and ready for whatever the day throws at you. And the best part? No prep, no mess. It's like having your own personal crew in the kitchen. Factor meals are ready to heat and eat, leaving you more time for pre-flight checks or just kicking back in the pilot's lounge. Plus, Factor is as flexible as your flight schedule. Order as much or as little as you need each week with the option to pause or reschedule deliveries anytime. It's the perfect solution for anyone who is always on the move. And speaking of being on the move, it's now time to get yourself on the move over to your computer. Visit factormeals.com/so-there-I-was-50 to get 50% off your first box. That's right, half off. Head to factormeals.com/so-there-I-was-50 and use the code so-there-I-was-50 to get 50% off. That's code so-there-I-was-50 at factormeals.com/so-there-I-was-50 to get 50% off. So thank you to Factor for sponsoring that. So you were out doing the Hornet training. I think this is about as good a time as any to circle back to that intro story because I can't think of a more terrifying place on the planet to be than on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, especially on your own if you haven't spent any time out there.
Yeah. What led up to this? First of all, did they say, "Hey, Hoover, would you like to be carrier Qual'd?" Or did they just say, "Hey, you're going to the boat, bro"?
This is part of the program, man. I got the full enchilada from the training. You can't get away from that.
Well, this is unique because as you know, your peers, or everybody that was with you going through training had been there already.
Yep.
Right. In probably the T-45 Goshawk at that point.
Yeah.
And so
they'd all been there before. And so I will back up the story a little bit, because, you got to get on the boat somehow. Right. And so they give you the opportunity, to say, okay, well, half the class is going to fly the jets out there and the other half, you're just going to walk on when it's in port here. Well, I got into that group of you're going to be the half that gets to walk on. All right. And I've never been on freaking carrier before, so I have no idea how this thing works, right?
Big gray boat.
But a bunch of the instructors from 101, they were going out for some drinks. One of the bars there in Coronado, they said, "Hey, why don't you come with us? Have some drinks, and then we'll all walk on, together at the end of the evening. Once when we're all ready to go." Yeah. So I grabbed one of the other students in the class. I said, "You're going to be my DD," because none of the other students were invited to go hang out with the instructors.
Right? No.
So come with me, as a buddy of mine. So we go hang out and we're having drinks and stuff. And I'm like, "So what time do we need to be there?" And they're like, "Don't worry about it, man. As long as you're on before it leaves port, you're good. You just don't worry about it." And meanwhile,
they are setting you up.
well, I knew I was probably okay because they were still there with me, right?
Okay,
So I'm like,
fair
as long
enough.
as the instructors haven't left, I'm probably safe. But in the meantime, my buddy, he's like, dude, we gotta get out of here, man. We gotta go. And eventually, I had way too many adult beverages.
Sure.
And so we make our way down to the port there, and my buddy's trying to explain to me, okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk up and there's going to be these sailors there and you're going to do this and that. And trying to explain that, number one, to an Air Force guy, but to an Air Force guy that's drunk was not like a good idea. And so as we're going up to the top, of the, what's it called? The gangplank or whatever.
Gangplank, yeah.
Gangplank.
We get up to the top of that thing. And sure enough, there's a little table there. And some sailors sitting there. And then there's this old guy in some PT shorts with like a Navy sweatshirt on standing off to the corner. And as we get up to the top, he's like, you two, come over here. I'm like, who is this old guy? So we walk over there and he looks at us and he starts yelling. He said, do you know what time it is? My buddy, he's just, standing strict attention and I look at my watch and I was like, honestly, I can't even read my watch right now. I have no idea what time it is. And then he looks at me, he's like, what did you just say to me? I said, I can't read my watch, sir. And he's like, sir, you're GD right, sir. I'm the GD CAG of this ship. And
oh,
he
shit.
starts going off and about, all this stuff. And my buddy is just like, you can tell he's just like, can't believe this is happening. And as the middle of the guy's like standing like right there, 6 inches from my face, screaming at me, like I raised my hand and he's like, what are you doing? I said, can I just interrupt for a second? I'm an Air Force guy. I don't know what's going on here, but my buddy said we just need to be on the boat
Before it
and
leaves.
I just want to get through all of this, or something to that effect. And he looks at us and he looks at my buddy, and you could tell he was trying so hard not to start laughing. And he looks at my buddy. He's like, "Get him to his room, and I don't want to see you two again." And then that was my story for getting on the boat. And the funny enough though, the instructors, they were about 30 minutes behind us.
Oh shit!
They did not get the same treatment that I got. So, but
that's rich.
Yeah, so we get there.
It's beautiful.
And so now I'm sleeping it off. And next day, I think it was the next day, there was no flying. It was they were still going where they needed to or whatever, or I wasn't on the board or something. But then it comes my day to fly. And, like you said, I've never been on a carrier deck before, let alone one out at sea. And so I have no idea what's going on. And I got, down in the ready room and they're like, all right, here's your side number, which is, the tail number of the jet you're flying, and here you go. Here's what you're supposed to do. You're going to, and the standard routine was you're going to take off and you come back around, you do your trap and then you launch again. You keep doing that and get as many cycles as you can in. Right. And I'm like, well, isn't there going to be like an instructor with me or something for my first time? And they're like, no, what do you need an instructor for? That's what we've been doing, CQ practice, our field landing stuff, for the past month,
Right.
I'm like, well, how am I supposed to know not where to walk and not walk on the deck and stuff? They're like, well, just grab one of I think it was I don't even remember which color they are, the brown shirts or,
Brown shirt or a green shirt.
Yeah. Grab one of the brown shirts and tell him where you're going. He'll make sure you don't die out there. And so I crack open the door, the deck there, and I take a step out, and the boat's moving, and you're like,
right.
And you got the wind rush, and then all of a sudden there's a jet that lands right in front of you. And I'm just like, holy crap, what have I gotten myself into? I don't know what I'm doing here. And so sure enough, all right, let me find somebody that can help me make sure I don't run into anything and kill myself out here. And they got me over the jet. Wow. But that whole experience, from that, and I still, I remember almost all of it, just sitting there trying to go through your normal startup sequence and pre-flight checks and all that stuff. And, and jets landing right in front of you. And you're just like, what the heck is going on? And it's so, okay, like I got to get back in my rhythm, do my checklist, do what I'm supposed to do, and then you get out there. And then when you pull onto the cat, for those that don't know, they've got like a whiteboard that they hold up with like a weight, right? So whatever you think your fuel weight is, so they can set the cat to the right power setting or whatever the right terminology is there, right?
Put you off
Set
the
you
right
off with
speed.
enough steam.
Yeah. So you're supposed to look down at that, compare it to, your aircraft fuel load and weight, and, you tell them up or down or whatever. And I just remember looking at the board and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I just give them a big thumbs up. I'm like, we're good, man. Like, I don't know. And I'm sure, for the students, it's probably all set to be super conservative anyways,
you bet. Yeah.
And so then you sit there and you do all, you run up to full afterburner, and you're sitting there, and I've got my hand on the towel rack, and I'm like, okay, I've saluted them. And now I'm like sitting here, I'm like, and it felt like forever, the first time you do something like that, you're just sitting there going like, something's wrong, because we're not going anywhere yet, and then all of a sudden it kicks. And that is like, an experience you will never forget if you, once you do it. And I just remember, oh shit, as I'm going, and we get airborne there, and my Air Force habits immediately kick in, because as soon as I got airborne, was the first thing I did. I raised the gear,
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, wait a minute, no, I'm not supposed to do that. Like, so I put the gear back down, turn back into the downwind there to bring it back around, and I land, and then you land, you trap, and I trapped on the first try. Like,
Okay.
all right, like, okay, I lived. Okay, I got to do it again now.
Okay, I lived. I love it.
So,
Now I got to do it again. Oh, that's beautiful.
yeah. So it's, what is it? 10 day traps and 6 night traps, I think it was. Yeah. So
Did you do it all in one shot? Or the day traps?
No, I think it was, we did it 2 days, because they do that thing where you've got to wait for the helicopter to land, and refuel while in the middle of the cycle there or whatever.
Yeah.
And so
That's
Which boat was it?
I was getting ready to ask that. What ship?
Yeah.
the Lincoln, if I remember correctly.
Okay. You said I need to get clarification on something. I know what you're talking about. However, some of our listeners won't. You said hand on the towel rack.
Yeah. So they tell you, when you're taking off on the cat, you're not supposed to have you're not supposed to hold on to the control stick there, because they don't want you, a reflex, they don't want you to pull back on the control stick or whatever, or basically react to what's happening. So the trim is all set for takeoff, to where, if you're not touching the control stick, you've got the left hand, up in afterburner, and the right hand is grabbing, they call it a towel rack, but it's basically just a handle there. I guess you can, I never flew with a towel, but you could always, some guys do.
Yeah. It's a handle. It's a handle like up the canopy bow, right?
Yeah. Up on the canopy bow, and you leave your handle there, and then your hand's off. And as soon as it launches, because of the way the trim is set and the configuration of the aircraft, you climb away at a certain pitch angle, and then, okay, like now it's stabilized. Now I've reached down, and then you take over the controls and go from there. Now,
Right.
I'm going to say something. Well, I saw it go through some of our live chats going on here, but you should wear wings of gold after that, because you did it. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
That's it.
Yeah,
That's naval aviation.
I'm very impressed, Hoover. That's a great story. But the fact that you didn't go to the boat as a student, like we all did, and now you're just being thrown into this thing. It's impressive.
Well, like I said, I mean, that was one of the
You're kind of expected to know it.
Well, that was one of the big differences between, how the Air Force does things and the way the Navy Marine Corps does stuff. And I mean, the Air Force never would have done that. They would have said, okay, we recognize you haven't been to the carrier ever. So we're at least going to put, Instructor Wizzo or somebody in your back seat to make sure you don't kill yourself on the, on the first flight. But the Navy Marine Corps is just a little bit different in the way they do things. And that's okay too, So it definitely builds a lot of confidence when you do it that way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's
the other thing that you said was interesting was, something you do something like that. It's something you'll never forget, if you hadn't experienced it before. And I still, 40 years later now, almost at least 35, remember my very first cat shot. It was in a T2 off the Lexington. And between the excitement of the moment and the air being forced out of my lungs, I was doing this high pitched, like a 6-year-old girl coming off of there. That was such a hoot. And I think I would say 4 Gs easily straight back as that thing's shooting you down range.
Well, the Lexington had such a short
And then I
cat
thought
stroke.
my engines had quit. Yeah, the Lex was a shorter cat stroke. And then when I came off, it was relatively speaking so much quieter. I had to physically look down at my engine gauges and make sure I hadn't lost my engines. I thought, oh, they quit. And the relative acceleration was so much less. It almost felt like I was being thrown forward. And it was like, oh no, they're still running. Okay, I'm good. But yeah, that was nuts.
I'm very impressed by that, Hoover. So you show up in Beaufort at VMFA AW 533, and did you guys deploy while you were there?
We did one Westpac during that 2 years that I was there. So for those that don't know, Westpac is the we go out to Iwakuni in Japan, where you kind of land based out of there, and then while we're at Iwakuni, you hop around to some of the different spots over there. So we went to Thailand and Malaysia, Singapore, Korea, and did all that stuff. A couple weeks here and there at a time. So
did you guys get down to Darwin?
That was definitely a different experience too. So
did you get to Darwin while you were in?
No.
Okay. Did you go down? Did you say Kadena? Did you guys go down and operate out of Kadena a little bit?
We did good. That's about as far as I guess. I don't know if that's further south than Singapore, but that's but we did go down there.
All right.
What would you say? Oh, I'm sorry, Fig. Were you going to stay on that line of questioning for a second?
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of curious as to what your impressions are about the two different airplanes, the Eagle and the Hornet. Obviously, two different missions and that sort of thing. But I'm wondering if you have. Obviously, is one your favorite over the other? I think I know what your answer will be, and I think I understand why. But they're such different airplanes, somewhat similar missions. Did you find one easier to fly, one more rewarding to fly? Can you talk about that for us a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I have to say, I really enjoyed flying the Strike Eagle more, but only because of the way they employ that aircraft and because of its capability. It just enables it to do a whole different mission set, or at least a much longer missions and more complex stuff than what the Hornet is capable of, because it's just got such short legs with its fuel capacity and the limited amount of ordnance that you can carry on it compared to a Strike Eagle.
Right. And
so the one thing that I really liked about the Hornet was I really enjoyed doing all the FAC-A stuff, being able to control, close air support missions from the air, from the cockpit, and working directly with the ground forces and having that capability. Cause that is something that the Air Force doesn't do in the Strike Eagle. The A-10s do that. And I know some of the F-16 squadrons have the FAC-A qualification, but the Strike Eagle doesn't. And I really enjoyed the Hornet. The Hornet was a fun jet to fly, especially doing like slow flight BFM, one-on-one, dogfights, in close quarters, just because of the nose authority and the high AOA maneuverability of the aircraft. It was really, really neat to fly that thing, because the Strike Eagles, you take the C model Eagle and then you slap on the conformal fuel tanks, and then you slap on some external wing tanks is just not really made for, for dog fighting,
Right.
like that, So I liked both of them, but in general, I felt
For different reasons.
Yeah, for different reasons.
Yeah.
But you always,
Well, you always like your first girlfriend, always.
First true love.
Yeah, that's right. I get
There's
it.
that. I felt like I was asking, which child is your favorite? I get it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say, but he did. He had a favorite, and I get it. I mean, totally.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's really cool that you got that experience. That's it's rare. I don't know what percentage of, I know. Well, I know a lot of Harrier guys, and only like 3 that I can think of did an exchange tour. And, so it's pretty rare. I don't know if everybody really knows that, but getting to do an exchange with another service or go to another country's service and do an exchange is pretty rare. It's a unique opportunity. I'm glad you got to do that.
We have, I know down at Buford, it was typically, they'd only have one Air Force guy there at a time. So, when I left, I got replaced with another Air Force guy, and, you're competing with all the other fighter platforms too. So there's, Strike Eagle guys, A-10 guys, and, C model guys, all that stuff that want to do those types of things. They're interesting assignments because they're really good for, or a lot of fun, I think for the pilot in terms of career development and putting you on a specific track for like different leadership opportunities, things like that with the Air Force. Like they're not really so much good for that because they kind of take you out of the Air Force chain of command and out of the Air Force cycle for a 3-year period. And so you're kind of forgotten a little bit, by the community during that time, and so you're trying to kind of work your way back into things when you go back. But, that's a whole nother discussion on officer development and, what we should really be doing.
Now, just to clarify, there was one Air Force exchange pilot at Buford period or per squadron?
One at Buford. I was the only Air Force guy on the base. So
that's what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah.
That's pretty unique.
Yep. Yeah. So it was weird, because you're walking around, uniform looks a little bit different than everybody else's, and then you've got the blue hat, versus everybody else's green or tan hats, depending on Navy, Marine Corps,
Right.
So
now this is administrative and it really doesn't matter, but who does your OPR while was it the Marines signing it or was there an Air Force? I mean, how'd that work?
That's part of the crappy part. Depending on how long the exchange program's been going, like some are more successful at doing this than others. But for the program that I was in down at Buford, I wrote my own performance report.
Okay.
Which, having no experience really writing those reports at that point, I thought I was writing like really awesome reports. But, and of course the Marine Corps, they just sign off on them, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And then the Air Force is like, like, okay, now it's a part of my permanent record,
Yeah.
and I'd find out, 3 years later that like I should have written those a little bit better if I wanted, certain opportunities and things like that.
Doesn't walk on water every day, only 6 days a week. Wait a minute. What did you do wrong? Why weren't you walking on water 7 days a week?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, because how the Air Force does all those compared to how the Navy and the Marine Corps handle performance reports. It's just completely different system and styles of writing and what they're looking for and stuff like that too. So
how'd you so you have a YouTube channel, Pilot Debrief. If folks, this is a fun channel to go learn about some really cool things in aviation. You cover a lot of really tough stories and you do it with grace. I know it's got to be hard to hold your tongue sometimes, and other times it's just got to be heartbreaking to see what you're doing. But how did you get into doing the YouTube thing? Was it safety in the Air Force? Was it?
Yeah. So I got started and down the safety path towards the end of my career in the Air Force. And then one of my last jobs in the Air Force was the wing chief of safety. So in that job, you're responsible for overseeing all of the aviation safety on base, all of the occupational safety. So all your OSHA compliance type stuff, as well as weapons safety. So basically anything that happens on that base, somebody gets injured, whether it's, running a plane into something or, falling off a ladder, trying to paint the side of a building, you cover all that stuff with the investigation. So So that's how I got started in that process. And I kind of liked it, but I didn't ever really think I would be doing something like that outside of the Air Force.
Yeah.
And then, I started, I would see, as I'm sure you guys do, you see like aviation mishaps in the news and stuff like that. And, then you have friends and family that kind of ask you about those things. And what do you think happened, and let's talk.
And then the misinformation around them is always astounding.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then,
that's fun.
then you'd start, I can't remember which one it was, but I remember, at one point reading one of the NTSB final reports on, some mishap that happened. And I remember reading it going like, really? Like, is that it? There's gotta be more to this story, and that led me to discovering, well, the NTSB has a whole other site that has the docket, which is all of the supporting documents for the investigation, where they do the interviews and the analysis and everything else that doesn't make it into that final report. And then you start reading through some of that and you're like, well, holy crap, man. Like why didn't they talk about this? Or why didn't they talk about that? And the other thing that was kind of frustrating to me was, you'd read the story about a mishap and it would say, well, the probable cause was the pilot exceeded the critical angle of attack and he stalled. And you're like, well, no crap. Like, of course that's what happened. But like, how did he get to that point? Like, what did he do that caused him, to get to there? And then that's when you go, and it's maybe not in the final report, but you go back in the docket and you find out, well, this guy, he wasn't even licensed to be, wasn't even qualified to be flying the aircraft. And he had lied about this or that. And, and oh, by the way, he didn't run any checklist, and sometimes that stuff would make it into the final report, but a lot of times there's details that don't. And I've learned over the past year or so of doing this, a lot of it's really dependent on the person at the NTSB that's doing that investigation and the level of experience they have and whether they include it or not. And so that's why I decided, I said, all right, well, let's start an aviation channel. Let's talk about some of these things. And it really started with, well, let's try to explain these different ATC events, right? Air traffic control, where, you have the air traffic controllers, recording of the conversation, the radio calls and stuff, for an aircraft that's having an emergency situation. So I started off making some videos of those, and those are some of the earliest ones on my channel. And then it evolved into what it is today, where, I'm taking basically an NTSB investigation into something and then just doing a deep dive analysis. And really it's trying to find compelling stories and share as many lessons as I can from those stories, because one, pilots appreciate them because they know it makes them safer. Student pilots learn from them. I get also a lot of non-flyers watch the channel just because of the compelling nature of the story, because there's a certain human element to it. And that was the other thing that I found was missing with a lot of aviation content, is nobody ever really talks about the victims, of these things. Oh yeah. And well, how did these 4 kids end up on this plane, probably shouldn't have been, and here's what happened. So
that's always the heartbreaking too, when you see that. It's like people that have no control over whether they were there or not. And you're like, oh.
Yeah. Yep.
So, no, it's amazing. I highly encourage anybody to go look at Pilot Debrief on YouTube. Fantastic channel, some good stuff. So,
yeah, my YouTube shorts I try to end up being a little bit more lighthearted because it's really just talking about some of the stuff that I see in a 30 to 60 second clip, but it's the videos that do the deep dive type stuff. And I guess it's interesting because when I start doing the research, I can get a little emotional sometimes because you're reading, maybe the cockpit voice recorder of everything that was said all the way up to the moment of impact. Yeah, that's and that's really hard, especially when everything that was done wrong that on that flight, that they never should have been in that situation to begin with. But I was telling my wife, it's weird sometimes because I have to go through it so many times, either doing my research or doing the filming and the editing of the video, that by the time I post that video, it's almost like, it's a non-event, if you will, for me anymore. It's lost its emotional significance, to a certain degree. But then people start commenting on the video, and all of a sudden you realize, oh wow, yeah, that's right. Like, and it's like you're going through it for the first time again, because these people are seeing it for the first time presented to them. So
that's a lot of work. That's kind of a labor of love for you now, isn't it?
Yeah, I enjoy doing it. It's as sad as some of these are. I hesitate to say it's fun for me, but I do enjoy, making that type of content and trying to simplify things and break it down. So,
there's value in that. As aviators, we can learn from other people's mistakes. And you're just pointing out some things, and there's non-aviators that are interested in this kind of thing, but truly it's valuable. And thanks for doing that.
But as they say, flight manuals are written in blood, right? So sadly, a lot of this is written in blood, and hopefully somebody can take that take these all as learning points. So
yeah.
Well, I want to say, first of all, Hoover, it's been a pleasure. We've had you on here for an hour and 15 minutes, and it's gone. It seems like about 10 minutes to me.
Right.
I could listen to more stories forever, but I know you have a life. I want to say thank you for your service, sir, and I really enjoyed our visit.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for reaching out to me and for the invite and for your service as well. I think you guys are doing an awesome job with the show. Glad to be a part of it. And yeah, I definitely could have talked for a lot longer and plenty more stories to share, but
you got to come back then.
So this is what happens always. You're, as soon as we stop recording and you go to have a beer, you're going to think of 7 things that you should have told us. So just write the bullets down and we'll have you back. Is that cool?
Absolutely.
All right.
Love to have you back.
We'll make a plan for it.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to say a quick salute to all of our military veterans and their families who support the families who support them in their important mission. And I want to say thank you for everybody out there.
Indeed. The families go unrecognized more than anybody. We also need to thank a couple other people. Thanks, of course, always goes out to Dave Hamilton over at Backbeat Media, who has a show, the Mac Geek Gab, the Business Brain, and the Gig Gab for musicians.
And our advertising is handled by Backbeat Media, backbeatmedia.com. Thank you, Dave Hamilton.
Indeed. We have a glossary, so if we have a term like FOD or FAC or TOC or TAC or anything else that we didn't get it in there, TALRAC. Yeah. Shoot us an email and we'll get in there. You can go find that at sothereiwas.us/glossary. And then how would someone write to us, Fig, to ask us about something on there?
Well, if you want a proper answer, a intelligent answer, you better address it to Sticks at he's funny. He's in the background. I can see him. Sticks at sothereiwas.us. And you can also repeat at sothereiwas.us and Fig at sothereiwas.us. However, if you want a really good answer, you should address Sticks, because he is absolutely got a higher IQ than both of us put together.
Absolutely. One other thank you we need to get out there is to all our supporters online at sothereiwas.us/Patreon. All the people taking their hard-earned money that they're paying taxes on, it's put in their wallet, and they turn around and frivolously throw it at us. We don't know why, but we're grateful that you do. We are humbled by your support, and it helps us keep these great guests coming to you every week. It's a big deal, and we're honored. So thank you so much.
Well, where are we at here? Hey, rate us. Rate our show.
Yeah.
Give us some feedback. If you've got actual feedback that's not 5 stars, tell us how we can get it to 5 stars. We're trainable. We're trainable. Yeah. For the most part.
Usually. Yeah. sothereiwas.us/rate. Yeah. So watching tonight, I saw him there in the background, is Brad Solcott at bdsaviationphotography.com. He lets us use a lot of his imagery. So indeed, thank you to him for letting us use some of those great photos. He takes some amazing shots, mostly down in the Eastern Carolina area. Got some great Harrier shots, but other naval aviation photos too. And I bet he even has a Strike Eagle or two in there somewhere.
I'll bet he does. I want to say, hey, thanks to Bago. Bago's in the background there somewhere. I don't think he's with us right now, but he's always back there doing stuff for us in the background. Thank you, Bago.
Indeed. Thanks for all his help, particularly over at facebook.com/sotherewas.us. He handles that page for us with grace, and he's on there a lot more than I can be. So that's deeply appreciated. Then two last guys we need to say our thank yous to, Fig.
Yes, sir. Well, their music's playing in the background there. Those are the two F-16 pilots that make the Air Force sound good. The Dos Gringos.
Dos Gringos. Go listen to them. They have a great song, in fact, about Air Force pilots wanting to land on a carrier. And our guest tonight did it.
He could probably, or a Hoover could probably relate to that song very well.
Yeah, take it back. They want to take off from a carrier.
They don't want to land. Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly.
That's a great song. Yeah, thank you to the Dos Gringos.
Indeed. So, all right, everybody. It's been great being with you this week. We appreciate all your love and support. And until next week, stay safe and check 6.
There I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond of all the shit I was wearing on that day. Now an F-16 is cramped enough, but it's even worse with all that stuff supposed to save your life. But we knew there was no way. 'Cause when you're going down the North Atlantic, man, it's over.
Hold on, what'd he say?
He said it's over.
Okay, that's a lawsuit.
What the hell?